All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Gershuni. I'm the Executive Director for the Energy and Environment Program here at the Aspen Institute. I'm also the co-director of Aspen Ideas Climate. So welcome to the Aspen Institute, especially for those of you from Festival 2 who are just arriving. In the fight against climate change, we're going to need to electrify everything we can, from cars and trucks to how we heat and cool our homes to how we make things like cement and glass. And we're going to need more renewable energy, like wind and solar, and we're going to need more advanced energies like advanced nuclear and advanced geothermal, and we're going to need to build a better grid. So how do we reshape our future? We're going to need the collective effort of policy support, investments in technology, and finance. And that's why today's conversation is so important. It's how we're going to shape the way we live today and tomorrow. So I'm really excited to introduce David Leonhardt, senior writer at the New York Times, to lead this conversation. David?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to introduce Scott Strazik, the CEO of GE Vernova, one of the newest companies out there, which we will get into. And we're going to have a good wide-ranging conversation about both the company and also about where we are in terms of green energy, some of the challenges, some of the exciting promise of these opportunities. And then we're going to open it up and hear questions from all of you. So let's start with what I think can be a surprising tension for many people, including for me, frankly, which is there is this tension between electrification and decarbonization. And I think when most of us hear about electricity, electric vehicles, we think, wait, that's clean energy, that's good. So how is it that there could possibly be a tension between electrification and decarbonization? Can you just explain that to us? And then can we kind of get into that mystery?
I think that's a great discussion, David. Thanks, and thanks for doing this with me. And everyone, thanks for giving us the time this afternoon. You know, at the start, when you think about industries that end up electrifying, it's really about them shifting from being powered by fossil fuels to then being powered by the electric power system. And the dynamic is, as we move from fossil fuels to being dependent on the grid, we need to make sure that grid is cleaner than what it's moving off of with fossil fuels, right, as that end goal. And the dynamic for me is I don't really necessarily think of these things as in contradiction with each other, because the reality is, as more and more things electrify, that creates that much more demand onto the electric power system, which gives us the opportunity to really recreate what the electric power system looks like. It's a lot harder to recreate yourself in a sector without demand. We're going into an investment super cycle in which many industries are going to be electrified. And as they electrify, it gives us the opportunity to recreate how that system works and make it cleaner and cleaner every day. And that's really what Vernova is focused on.
Is the right way to think about it that electricity can be cleaner but isn't automatically cleaner?
Yeah, I think, to me, when we think about electricity and we think about sustainable electricity, it starts that it needs to always be available. It needs to be reliable, it needs to be affordable, it needs to be resilient, and ultimately needs to be clean. And the reality is, when you take into account all these factors, it takes a lot of technologies and a lot of solutions to ensure we hit all of those criteria. Because you can have a very clean electric power system, but it doesn't work all the time. Or if it's too expensive that no one can actually buy it, that's a problem. And that's what makes for a complicated chess match here, because we need to have a combination of products and solutions that continue to meet all of those needs while we further electrifying the world every day.
So let's talk about one of the most positive developments and then what you see as one of the biggest challenges in terms of electrification. So sitting here in 2024, looking backwards, we'll look forward in a minute, I promise. Sitting here in 2024, looking backwards, what would you say is the thing that has gone best in terms of electrification and more broadly the clean energy transition over the last decade, or change the time frame if decade's wrong?
Yeah, I'd even go more short term than that. I mean, I think if we just think about the last 2 years or thereabouts, I mean, unfortunately, the crisis in Ukraine is an example of something that really brought to the forefront the intensity of energy security really mattering. And you look at what the Europeans are doing today to really try to get off of Russian gas, and they are massively investing into their grid and other zero carbon solutions to give them optionality on a go-forward basis to move off of fossil fuel and gas today. Now, at the same token, you think about the last few years in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act is a very important step forward for us to advance our renewable energy future. If you look at the last decade with renewable energy, we would often have tax policy that would extend 1 year to 2 years. And it's really hard to make investments to industrialize a product at scale to the most economic answer when you're never quite sure what the tax policy is going to be. What the Inflation Reduction Act drives is a dynamic where for the next decade plus, we have a lot more clarity on how the marketplace is going to work in this regard. And that is going to lead to another level of industrialization of an industry with wind and with solar that needs it. So both of those, although from very different catalysts, are both things that are driving substantial investments in the electric power system that are ultimately going to transform those industries.
How specifically does the Inflation Reduction Act affect Vernova?
Well, it very quickly after the Inflation Reduction Act, it gave us another level of confidence to invest into U.S. manufacturing. So as an example, our largest onshore wind turbines today are 6 megawatt wind turbines. Historically, we've made these in Europe. After the Inflation Reduction Act, we immediately capacitized one of our older factories in Schenectady, New York, that originally was for gas, and recapacitized part of the plant for those 6 megawatt nacelles to make in the US. Because with the Inflation Reduction Act, we could see enough certainty in the market over the next 10 years that it made sense to invest $50 million, hundreds of new jobs, because we had enough confidence that that market was coming.
And do you get subsidies from the law for what you're doing in Schenectady, or is it that your customers are getting subsidies?
Primarily the customers. The customers are getting a production tax credit, as it's called in tax language, that incentivize them to create the zero carbon power, but they also are incentivized, as are we, for it to be built in the US. And the amount of the subsidy is higher if they buy something that is US content produced, which then by default has a domino effect to us with a very large US manufacturing footprint.
I mean, that's so interesting because I know for a long time there's been a lot of skepticism about industrial policy, right? I mean, you just described industrial policy. You didn't use the word, but you just described industrial policy in a very positive way, which is they passed this law. They said, we're going to give you extra subsidy if you buy from things made in the United States. And then you went out and invested in Schenectady, which, as I'm sure many of you know, is part of upstate New York, which is really an economically struggling region. I mean, it's much more like the struggling parts of the Midwest than it is like anything in the New York metropolitan area.
That's right. And that's just one example of many. I mean, we've been investing into our nuclear business in Wilmington, North Carolina for our small modular reactors. The IRA helps with nuclear and the next steps there. Wind isn't just about Schenectady. We've made a substantial investment in Pensacola, Florida, industrializing a wind nacelle facility there in a similar fashion. So there's no question that the IRA has created another level of market certainty that is allowing us to invest into long-term assets that will play a role both electrifying and decarbonizing the U.S., but frankly will also create export potential for the U.S.
And from your perspective, this is an appropriate use of government policy and appropriate involvement of the government in industry.
Yeah, I think different governments take different tacks. Some use sticks, some use carrots to a larger extent. This is the carrot approach in the U.S. to really incentivize technology, but it's also over a long enough period of time that it ultimately puts the omen back on the industrial industry and companies to deliver on the other side of it. Because when you get a decade's worth of transparency to how the marketplace is going to operate, that creates real opportunity for us to serve that market. Now, to the other part of your question, we've been really talking a lot about power generation, and that's important. One of the challenges we still have is now the incentives are there to a much larger extent to create that zero carbon power, but it's getting harder and harder to get the transmission built, to get that zero carbon power connected to where it's needed to go. And that gets to things like permitting reform that's still needed to expedite the process so every community and every state can't take years of slowing down our ability to build these farms and connect them to where they're really needed. And that's an area that we still have work to do in the U.S. On the other side of your question of where aren't we where we need to be, in which we need to partner with the government and companies to work through what you'll sometimes hear of as the interconnect queue, which is a ton of new power that wants to get built, but needs a connection to the grid and ultimately needs the physical expansion of the grid to do it.
It's what's so interesting about that is it overlaps with so many other areas of economic policy. I mean, it's just so hard to build things in the United States, right? And so it makes it harder for us to accomplish the clean energy transition. It also makes it really hard for us to build affordable housing for people,
Yes.
right? Because everything is just so difficult. Okay, so we just talked about some of the positive developments. What's happened over the last several years in terms of the clean energy transition that's been a little disappointing?
Well, I think I just hit on one. I mean, we've got to continue to advance how we manage the grid. I think what I would tell you is we've built this grid over 100 years, and it's built for a system that is powered by coal, intended to be built by power coming from coal that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and goes in one direction towards the house. That's not our world today. We have more and more wind and solar that has intermittent dynamics to it. We have electrons not just going to the house, but we have the house pushing the electrons back into the system with solar panels on roofs and Ford 150s that are batteries themselves. And the reality is our grid isn't really built for that multi-directional flow of electrons, nor is it built for the variability of the power generation sources. So we have to make a substantial investment in the brains of the grid, because if the brains of the grid don't really uptick what they're capable of doing, we'll suboptimize as we build more and more of this zero carbon power, and there will be more and more waste into the system. That's a real opportunity for us, and that's one of the things GE Vernova is investing heavily into. It's a very small business for us today, but grid software strategically is one of our most important businesses as I see it for the decades that follow, because we're really going to have to modernize how this grid thinks and works. And it's an incredible opportunity, but one that we need to move faster on.
Yeah. Let's talk for a couple minutes about the company, because
Yeah.
it's such a part of American history. And I think there's some interesting things about corporate strategy today that are broader than your industry. So, I mean, General Electric
Yes.
is part of the original Dow, right?
Yes.
In Jones Industrial Index. Thomas Edison essentially helped start the company.
That's right.
Right? It is Neil Armstrong was wearing what, shoes made by GE when he gets on the moon. GE in many ways is responsible for Ronald Reagan's political career. I mean, it's just this iconic company, and Jack Welch as the late 20th century CEO. And then you all decide essentially this isn't working, right? We want to be smaller, not bigger, and you divide into three companies.
That's right.
GE Vernova is one of them. And you basically, as a company, your official birthday is April 2nd.
That's right.
So we're talking, you're months old.
Sure.
So walk us through, why is it, from a corporate strategy perspective, you all decided we'd rather be smaller than bigger?
You bet. And at the start, I'd just say, I mean, in my case, I've spent my entire adult life at General Electric, 25 years. And it's for the reasons that David just framed up. I mean, we have been a company that's always had great ambition, wonderful people, technology that matters, and industries that are really, really important. But we made the decision in November of 21 to focus into three purpose-built companies to lead in its respective industries: aerospace, healthcare, and energy, which ultimately has become what we now call GE Vernova. And even with the Vernova, just for context, we really chose Vernova by bringing together two words: verde green, nova new green innovation. So GE Vernova together, acknowledging the 130 years we spent electrifying the world, but also being very overt and acknowledging that the world is changing and we need to change with it. And that was for our teams, for our customers, for governments, for all stakeholders that we interact with. Now, for us, on the other side of the spin, and we announced this in November of 21, and our birthday was April 2nd of this year, this is an incredible opportunity, because the reality is we are a startup, but we're a pretty big startup. $35 billion of revenue. We're a leader in gas power and nuclear power and wind, both onshore and offshore, in all things associated with the grid. So what we're now able to do, though, is we're a purpose-built company where our board of directors, our management team is entirely focused on leading in the energy transition. We're not having to compete with capital with an aerospace business or a healthcare business. And our customers now know that we're reinvesting the money they give us in them, in the energy transition, versus the risk of them paying us for it to be redeployed into aerospace, which is an incredibly important industry, but we've got pretty big challenges and opportunities ahead of us with energy to a large extent. Another example that I'd bring up that is really important is think about how much money is going into emerging technologies with the energy transition right now. There's tons of startups. We chose Cambridge, Mass for our headquarters because I wanted us to be in that ecosystem, because there's so many startups that come out of the MITs of the world, but those companies need help industrializing something at scale. They need help with customer reach. And the reality is, I want GE Vernova to be that partner of choice. Now, convincing that ecosystem of entrepreneurs to come on board to a big, broad, diversified GE, hard. Convincing them to come into GE Vernova in some way, shape, or form of a partnership where our reason for being is to electrify and decarbonize the world every day, I like our chances. So it gives us a much better platform to lead at an exact time that the world is going into an investment supercycle related to energy. So I think it's incredibly exciting. It's a more focused company, but a more focused company on one of the world's greatest challenges at a time where that focus is needed.
Why would it have been harder to persuade investors to come into a conglomerate than a more focused company?
I just think at times, I say often, too many goals can be no goals at all.
Yep.
And I think focus is a valuable thing for impact and clarity. And, you know, I'm always asking myself as a leader, how do I eliminate ambiguity? How do I eliminate confusion and just make sure there's no ambiguity on what our goal seek is? GE Vernova is here every day for one core purpose: to electrify and decarbonize the world, both simultaneously, because we need to massively increase the supply of electricity to support those industries that today are powered by fossil fuel. But we have to do it cleaner every day and every week and every month, and that is our reason for being. With that simplicity, our ability to pull in more of that ecosystem is going to be that much greater.
Can you just give us a minute on what it was like to name a new company? I mean, you said a core mission is electrification. Did you think about just calling yourselves General Electric? Did you have 200 names on a board? And I mean, was it like naming a kid? What was it like?
More time than naming a kid, I'll tell you, for sure. A lot of fun Friday afternoons every week for a better part of half a year, to be very honest, because a lot of this comes back to what do you stand for? And you want to do it once, right? So whether it be our name, GE Vernova, whether it be, you know, our purpose statement of talking about having the energy to change the world, those aren't things that we settle on in a week. Because they are important to help stakeholders throughout the world understand what we stand for. And I think especially coming from an incredible heritage of what GE represents, we probably spend even more time on it, because there's this nuanced, delicate balance between being very appreciative and respectful of the incredible history we have, while being modestly edgy on wanting to reinforce that it's a new day. And we're a new company, and we're going to operate differently and play this game in a way that we think the world needs to achieve its goals. And again, one of our biggest challenges in taking on climate change and getting this thing right.
Let me ask you about two critiques of the company and give you a chance to respond to them or even object to my framing. So one thing that environmentalists have said of GE Vernova and of other companies as well is they spend a lot of time talking about the efforts they're making on green energy, but really much of their profits still come from dirty energy. And what they need to be done, they need to be pushed more toward clean energy, and that there is a greater focus in their communication on clean energy than actually on their balance sheet. How do you respond to that?
I'd love any of those critiques to come and spend a few days with us and, come and visit our Advanced Research Center in Niskayuna, New York, where today we have a running direct air capture plant that's pulling carbon out of the air right now. or come and see where we're going with our advanced technology with small modular reactor, well, we'll commission our first 300 megawatt block of power this decade in Canada. Now, the dynamic on kind of dirty technology, and in our case, listen, cutting right to it, our largest business is our gas power business. And gas today, and unabated gas, has carbon attached to it. But to be very clear, investing in a new gas plant or in gas today is not investing in carbon forever. We have a very clear pathway to decarbonize gas power. We'll do that with hydrogen. We have over 8 million hours today already running our gas turbines with hydrogen and hydrogen-like fuels. We will attach carbon capture to those gas plants. And through that process, we'll decarbonize gas. So we're investing across the ecosystem, whether it be gas power, whether it be nuclear, whether it be the 57,000 wind turbines we have creating electricity in the world today, or the massive investments in modernizing, expanding, and changing how the grid operates. So these are all part of the equation. But going back to gas and the dirty analogy, we don't view gas as anything other than an accelerant and a force multiplier today to further electrify and decarbonize the world. Because if you don't have an alternative to complement wind and solar, we're not going to be able to add wind and solar fast enough to the world. The reality is the electric power system today generates about 13 gigatons of carbon every year. 3 to 4 of it's gas. The rest is coal. We still have 2,000 gigawatts of coal running in the world today. We need to massively increase the supply of electricity while decreasing that 12 gigatons. Gas is going to play a critical role, because if we don't use gas, we're not going to be able to get the wind and solar built as fast as it needs to.
So far, the U.S. government, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, has done much more to subsidize cleaner energy. It's done very little to put a price on carbon.
Yeah.
Two things. Would it be helpful to the transition you're talking about, the move away from coal, if we did put a price on carbon? And regardless of whether you think it would be a good thing or a bad thing, do you expect it to happen in the medium-term future?
I don't know if I can predict in that regard what's going to happen, but I can tell you that we're finding it to be many different marketplaces or effective policies that we can operate and thrive in supporting our communities. So there's more of the stick approach. There's a carbon tax in Canada. There's a carbon tax in most parts of Europe. That's one way to incentivize clean energy. The U.S. is taking a different approach with more of the carrots to incentivize new technology. And that's both nascent technologies with the Infrastructure Act and getting real demos built. That's with the IRA and the subsidies that come with things like wind, solar, and storage. Either can work. The reality is policy clarity for the medium to long term. And consumers, my customers, us, we can operate and thrive in supporting either. But we are in a period of time where we've built this system over 100 years. We have 20 to transform it. That's not going to happen without businesses and governments working together. It will not. But there isn't one business policy approach that's a silver bullet. There's also not one technology. This is going to be an all the above that's going to be needed for us to take a 100-year system that's been built and completely transform it in the next 20 years.
We see, this will lead us to the second critique, we see actually a fair amount of skepticism among a lot of voters in Europe and in the United States about some of these clean energy policies, even some of the carrots, certainly the sticks. I mean, if you're following European politics right now, the two things that seem to be driving a lot of it are migration and some of the sticks that Europe has done on energy. And you really see a lot of European voters saying, hey, maybe we're moving too fast, which is obviously not how climate scientists feel, right? In the United States, President Biden's accomplishments on climate are not central to his reelection campaign because polls show that actually a lot of Americans are worried that we're moving too fast toward electric vehicles. I look at that and I say, because in both the United States and Europe, there are huge numbers of people who have really been struggling. Their income growth has not been that good,
Yes.
particularly people who don't have a four-year college degree. Inequality has widened in all kinds of ways. And people are out there and they're saying, yeah, on some level I get that we need to worry about the environment, but I got to put dinner on the table tonight. I got to pay for the house that will allow my family to live. How do you think about the skepticism out there of this sort of clean energy transition, particularly among Americans, and not just Americans, of lesser means?
You think about the economy and where money gets spent today. I mean, the world GDP, US GDP is similar. About 2% of the spend is on electricity. But the dynamic is it's the first 2%, because if you don't have it, the other 98% isn't going to come. And I give that framing to just say, for the world, for the country to reach its objectives, there's a lot of growth that has to come. And that growth is going to come with investment. And a big part of that investment is going to be in electricity supply, an electricity supply that we must have be substantially cleaner in the next decades than what we've experienced in the prior decades. So I think we have two options. Are we going to invest into growth that creates new optionality? Because let's think about the US. What's really driving the electric demand growth to be, for the first time in 20 years, going in a positive direction in any meaningful way? US manufacturing, chips, the dynamics with other industries like EVs. We haven't talked about artificial intelligence yet and the role that's going to play in the economy. All need real investments in infrastructure that ultimately create opportunities. Because if we don't get that 2% right, the other 98% is not going to grow. But we have to do it smartly. And we have to find the right balance. And that's why this isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's not the same solution in every country. It's not the same solution in every part of the US. Because different parts of the US and different parts of the world have different resources and different access. And that's what makes this an especially complicated chess match for us to play. Optimizing the resources we have in an all-the-above model that allows us to meet those growth potential, but to do it in an economic way that's affordable to the communities in which they operate, sustainable, resilient, and clean.
I mentioned Jack Welch before. He
Yeah.
obviously was a very successful and well-known executive in this country, for a time the most prominent executive in this country. And he framed things in a certain way, right? Very much focused on the idea of being very efficient and very competitive, and he succeeded on a lot of that. He also was not someone who tended to talk about stakeholders, right? He talked about profits and shareholders, and the people who venerate his time there say, look, he made the company more competitive, he helped make the US more competitive. People who criticize his time say he contributed to inequality, and that whole theory contributed to inequality. Can you talk now about a leader of one of the businesses that he ran? Yeah. How do you think about Jack Welch's legacy, and not him personally so much, but the legacy of Welchism?
Well, I think the most important part is where you started with, call it the productivity and the efficiency focus. A lot of what we talk about inside Vernova is we don't really have time, and the world doesn't have time for hobbies right now. We need to be able to industrialize things at scale that can have a meaningful impact on the world now. So we're really driving a filter of where are we spending our investments, where are we focusing our team's time to make sure what we're doing can have a meaningful impact on the world. Take wind as an example. Historically, we've had many wind turbine variants for different parts of the world. We've really shifted that business to focus on workhorse products, what we call, that we can do the exact same product thousands of times. Because the reality is, if the wind industry doesn't start doing the same wind turbine in blocks of 10,000 instead of blocks of hundreds, we're not going to make the progress we need to make. And I think at times this comes back to focus, simplification. And from what I know of that GE in that period of time, we became very good at prioritization and very good at focus. And that's very much at the center of what we're trying to accomplish with Vernova to have the greatest impact on the world.
When did you join GE?
The summer of '99.
And you were just coming out of business school?
No, undergrad.
Undergrad.
Yeah.
And so you've now been there, summer of 99, so your 25th anniversary coming.
Yes.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
What is it? That's not entirely normal in this day and age.
Yeah.
Why have you stayed, and what's it been like to work at just one company for so long?
It hasn't felt like one company. You know, we've gone through a lot of evolution in that time. But you know, I grew up in upstate New York. I went to school in upstate New York. GE for me was a red carpet to see the world and to play on a deep level in industries that I think really matter. And, you know, after starting with a company in the first few years and starting to get an opportunity to interact in the communities in which we operate globally, it becomes really stark and clear how important the work is that we do every day. And that was always critical to me wanting to be here, because I've always felt like the work we do and the technologies that we deliver matter. Now, that doesn't mean every chapter of the last 25 years hasn't had plenty of humbling moments, because it has. We've had to transform this company in many, many ways. But I can tell you in those 25 years, there's never been a period of time that I have had more optimism, more confidence, with humility on the role that what now is GE Vernova can play in the communities that we serve and all of our stakeholders, whether that be our teams, whether that be ultimately our shareholders.
I shouldn't get to ask all the questions, so let me invite a question.
Please.
I think we want to wait for a mic so the folks who are watching online now or later can also hear your question.
There's someone in the third row.
Got one coming, I promise.
Right here.
Thank you for waiting.
No problem. Is it on?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. I've always thought France sat in the catbird seat as far as having a strong nuclear program that basically freed itself up from the Middle East and petroleum. And so they've developed that as a strong part. I don't know what percentage of electricity it creates. But let's drill down on your nuclear part.
Yeah.
And also the climate for nuclear in terms of political issues.
Yeah.
With kind of the people are kind of, because of some of the accidents around the world, have not been particularly receptive to growing a nuclear program.
Thank you.
Spot on with everything you just said. I mean, France does get a lion's share of their electricity from nuclear. To some extent, the challenge of the question you can ask is, where do they get the nuclear fuel from? And that in its own right can be a challenge for France.
Is nuclear considered a clean energy?
Nuclear, I'll just yeah, the question was, is it considered clean? We certainly believe it is, yeah. And I think the public sentiment shift on nuclear has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. I sat in a room at COP28 with 22 leaders of state that basically committed to tripling the nuclear capacity in the world between now and 2050. That's after what I'll call a fairly sleepy prior decade, when outside of China and India, there wasn't a lot of new nuclear being built. That's changing, and changing in a very material way. And for us, our small modular reactor, which is 300 megawatt blocks of nuclear, is one of our largest investments. We'll commission the first plant in 2029 in Canada, and we expect it to become a very material part of the energy transition over the subsequent decades. It's not going to make a big difference this decade. This decade is really about how can we advance solar and wind as fast as we possibly can and decarbonize gas. But in future decades, nuclear is going to play a really important part, because with more and more time, we need what we call power-dense solutions. We need solutions that don't take up a lot of land, that can create a lot of electricity. Nothing's more power dense than nuclear. And we've made a lot of advances in technology to the point that communities are now understanding how safe it is. So with our small modular reactor, as an example, with no electricity connection, with no operator, over the course of 7 days, that existing nuclear facility will cool down on its own and then be completely safe. That's really what we've been investing in. So nuclear is going to play an important part of the energy transition. Thank you.
Who else?
Over here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I work on maritime shipping decarbonization,
Excellent.
which going forward we'll need green fuels powered by renewable energy. So could you talk a little bit about how you're using your clean electricity to create some of these clean fuels needed for hard-to-abate sectors?
You bet. And that's at the heart of the green hydrogen economy that'll come. The challenge that we have is we still have so much coal that is powering so much of the electric power system that in the nearest term, the world gets a bigger bang for the buck by building that wind and solar and just retiring coal. Before they take that wind and solar and combine it with water and create green hydrogen that can then go on the maritime applications. So there's going to be a chapter here where this is going to make an incredible amount of sense. And for longer duration solutions, hydrogen is going to play a really important role. But we've got a lot of wind and solar that very efficiently can have an impact on the world just connecting to the grid. And that's still going to happen at much more disproportionate levels in the near term. And that'll come as a fast follow. Thank you.
There was another hand right around here, yeah.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Well, since the cleanest energy is the energy we don't ever need to use,
yes.
I'm just curious, how do you think about energy efficiency in your business?
It's for us, we're not a company that's really focused on the edge, the homes themselves as an example. We're really more company to company, but your point is so spot on. And that's why we're investing so much in the grid software business, because we do foresee a lot of inefficiencies at risk of coming if we don't build a better system that interconnects where there's supply, where there's demand, and matching those things together. And using real predictive programs, whether it be where the weather patterns are going, as an example, to know when we're going to have excess energy in one place because we get really good wind in solar for a period of time, versus where are we not going to have that good weather and we need to point the electrons in that direction. We're not very good at that today. The electric power system has a lot of waste in it, and that's why we're investing in grid software so aggressively.
Scott, can I ask you to end by just sort of lifting up for us a little bit, which is not talking necessarily just about the sectors you're in, but the overall clean energy transition. There's so much reason and some really solid reason to be deeply concerned about where we are as a world, right? Warming temperatures, rising seas, increasing frequency of extreme storms. There's been some political progress, but there's also some real political gridlock as well.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of young people in particular are somewhere between deeply worried and cynical about it. How do you think about the climate change and the clean energy transition in the broadest sense of it? And how do you balance realism with optimism in a way that helps you think about the world?
This is an urgent challenge in front of us, and I think it starts there. I mean, I often make reference to my 11-year-old son. You know, his favorite thing to do is to ski. And he and I talk about how much that's going to be different if we don't change the arc of climate change. And we don't have a lot of time. And inside GE Vernova, we run this company with that urgent diligence that we have to act now in a decade of action and bend the arc. So in that regard, we want to drive real adult conversations on the fact that we feel that impatience and that urgency. On the same token, we know how to do a lot of this. We've got a lot of the technology. We've got to move faster. We've got to move faster at scale. But, you know, I was at the JFK Library in Boston recently, and you walk through the library and you go back to the early 60s and you read some of JFK's early speeches on the space race and what we had to accomplish in a decade there and what we did as a country. And if we take on this with that same urgency and intensity, I have an incredible amount of optimism that we can make an incredible impact. Because inside Vernova, we're not going to make light of the risk. I believe personally, and the company stands behind this risk being authentic, real, and an urgent world problem. But we're not going to suck our thumbs either. We're going to get up every day and make a difference. And that's to a large extent also why we chose Cambridge for our home. Because I meet so many young people that believe this is going to be their generation's biggest challenge. But then when I ask them where they're going to go take a job, they don't think about coming into this space, let's just say. So I could complain about that, or I could go to them. And that's really why we put our headquarters in Cambridge, because there's so many young people where this is going to be their generation's greatest challenge. We've got to solve it together. And it's going to take all the above. It's going to take companies. It's going to take governments. It's going to take this next generation of leaders to really go at it for the seriousness of what it is. But this is still a game we can win. And that's exactly why I feel like it's a total privilege to be part of GE Vernova and the role that we can play in really making a difference.
Thanks for the conversation.
David, thank you
Yeah,
very much. Thank you.